Deb the bra.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us here this evening in Davos, and also to the many people who we hope are joining online from around the world for our stakeholder dialogue on the 30 by 30 ambition, next steps after Montreal. And my name is Jane Nelson from Harvard Kennedy School, and it's my great pleasure and honor to serve as a facilitator for our dialogue this evening, where we're going to be discussing what are some of the most practical, creative, and scalable actions that we need to take and that we can take to achieve the ambitious goals and targets of the historic Global Biodiversity Framework. And I think people in this room certainly, but maybe online for a bit of background on the framework, as many of us will know, this is a truly historical, groundbreaking, and landmark agreement that was agreed at the Montreal COP15 meeting last month, where 196 countries have now committed to the protection of at least 30% of the Earth's lands, inland waters, coastal areas, and oceans by 2030. And when one considers that at an estimated only sort of 17% of lands are currently protected, and I think I'm correct in saying less than 8% of marine areas are protected, this is an ambitious goal, but it's doable, and it's absolutely critical that we get there. And it's critical both in terms of biodiversity and nature positive and nature-based solutions, but also climate, livelihoods, and human rights. And I think the overall agenda and pathway is clear and threefold. First, we've got to focus on protecting the nature that is still intact and strengthening the protection status of particularly of places that are currently threatened. Secondly, we have the incredible opportunity and responsibility to identify and develop new areas where nature conservation can become the predominant or major use of a form of land use. And thirdly, we've got to do both of those in ways that put people at the center and that respect indigenous rights, respect the human rights, the land rights, and the livelihoods of communities who live in or around these areas. And to achieve all three of those, clearly, we need to look at policy reforms, new business models, new partnerships, and very much new financing models. I think we all know the statistics, an estimated $140 billion needed a year, the need to rethink and restructure subsidies that can often be detrimental to nature, and thinking about fundamentally new ways of public-private financing alliances that are going to be needed to get us there. And I think we could not have a more outstanding group we've got actually sort of four remarkable leaders who are joining us here this evening as part of the dialogue, and I'll certainly be coming to you in the audience for comments and questions as well. But Minister Rania Al-Mashat, who is the Minister for International Cooperation for Egypt and been a real leader in this field, so thank you, Minister. Peter Fernhead, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Parks Network, and Andrew Steer, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Bezos Earth Fund. And also will be joining us later from the floor, Rico Yu, who is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Archie Reefs, a truly outstanding social enterprise at the sort of nexus of innovative technology and marine stewardship, who's one of our young global leaders. So without further ado, I'd like to actually start, Peter, with you. You, both personally and African Parks, have spent several decades now focusing on the rehabilitation and management of African both terrestrial and marine parks, and with a very strong focus on working with and learning from local communities and ensuring that they have a place at the table in engagement with you and with government. And so could you sort of get us going on what do we need to do to put people at the center and some of the key actions from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and it's thank you for everyone that's attending this. I think the first thing just to emphasize what you've done is that COP15 was so incredibly important for the world. And it's fantastic that at long last we have really clear alignment on both the problems of the world, and that we've got to really mainstream biodiversity and the fact that we also now have some targets to work towards. But in many ways, that's the easy bit. We've now got to shift into the action. We've got to shift into the doing. We've got 2,900 days to achieve those targets. So that's not a lot of time. What I would like to just also emphasize is that time sensitivity in Africa, and I only speak with an African perspective, that time sensitivity is so incredibly important because there's three compounding factors. The first of those is that in many countries there are real governance challenges, and those don't make working any easier. The second is that with the poverty levels that we have in Africa, there are so many millions of people that are so vulnerable to climate change and to extreme weather events. And when those things go wrong, nature is their only safety net. Governments, unfortunately, often aren't there. The international community isn't there. Nature is there. So it's so important for those people that we get nature right. And the third factor, just to keep in mind, is that from a continental perspective, well, from a global point of view, the population increase on this world is happening in Africa. We're going to have 3 times the number of people on the continent of Africa by 2100. And those 3 sets of factors make the urgency of what we're doing in Africa way more important. So when we talk about the 30% vision, by 2030, if we haven't achieved it by 2030, there's no rollover opportunity. 2,900 days. So what's the starting point on that? The starting point has to be making sure that we stop the conservation nature hemorrhage that's happening. So we've got to look after what we have, because if we look after what we have, we can build out from there. And at the core of the way that we think as African parks is the anchor area and anchor protected area. If you get that right, and you build off the strength of that, then you can move into adjacent areas. You can move into secondary protected areas. You can start supporting community conservation areas, the corridors that link them. But you've got to start at the starting point, which is the core area. But just to put this a little bit into perspective, so 30% of Africa is equivalent to conserving the whole of the United States of America. So that's our objective as Africa, is to conserve the whole of the United States of America. And I think that kind of puts this thing into perspective a bit. What is the starting point? Where are we? Because we talk about the 15, 16, 17% of the continent already under protection, 8,500 protected areas. The reality of that, sadly, is we're completely off that. So many of these areas have already been deforested and resettled, and they literally only exist on paper. So the starting point isn't the 15%. If it was, we're nearly halfway, well, we're halfway then to the 30%. Unfortunately, that's not where we're starting. We're starting way lower than that. We did an analysis of African parks a couple of years ago. We went in for sub-Saharan Africa, country by country, and we looked at all the protected areas. In our view, there are only 161 large scale, which is bigger than 50,000 hectares, key conservation areas that have the opportunity to protect nature at scale. So it's something where we've got a long way to go. Only half of those 161 have a management solution in place now to be able to move forward into the future. So starting point, making sure that the other half have a management solution. That means technical expertise, and it means finance. And it's something where we have partnerships with 12 different governments in Africa. We probably have good relationships with at least another 12. Every single one of those governments wants to be part of the solution, every one. And they are all asking for help. And that's what we do as African Parks. We are government's partner, sometimes with local communities as well, to manage their protected areas and to provide them a solution. So to close, we need to move from the talking and the frameworks and the targets. We've got to move into action. Because if there isn't going to be action, we are not going to achieve that target. So it's something where I said 2,900 days, but tomorrow there's 2,899.
Thank you for that important reminder of the urgency and no time to waste on this. And so you mentioned the importance of governance and governments. And Minister, I'd like to come to you. I mean, Egypt has obviously been a key champion on for the 30 by 30 targets, and also it's going to be a crucial country in terms of delivering on them. I mean, from your experience and building on some of your existing lessons on both adaptation and resilience, where do you see some of the great potential?
Well, of course, Montreal, as was mentioned, was truly a breakthrough, and it comes after a COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, which emphasized very powerfully the importance of adaptation and resilience, and also for the first time a trust fund as a discussion for loss and damage. And therefore, the idea of the 30 by 30 is to ensure that we move forward so that this does not move into loss and damage. That's the whole point. If we're able to adapt, if we're able to protect the areas, as was mentioned, technical advisory, policy is extremely important, creating more awareness, those who have worked in order to scale to other areas. All of these are very important frameworks that need to be done and need to be done very quickly. But the concept of climate, very much integrated, mitigation, adaptation, resilience, biodiversity, all of this to ensure that we don't move into or drop off the cliff so that we go into a discussion of loss and damage, and then all the definitions of what we mean, because people, there's a livelihood impact. It's not just about the land that is lost or the biodiversity that is lost that could not be replenished, but it's also all the livelihood around these areas. How do we quantify that? So the 30 by 30 is, in my view, quite realistic, because what you lose between now and 2030, if we don't do this, is even more in magnitude. But very practical issues need to be addressed. Financing. And now, when we take a look at the spectrum, we need financing for adaptation and resilience. We need financing for mitigation. We need financing for biodiversity. So there needs to be, we need to think creatively about how we go forward. Nonetheless, I believe that where we are today in terms of the narrative, in terms of more collaboration, private sector is coming in, more philanthropy is coming in more, and also the communities, particularly in the protected areas, are working very hard to within that ecosystem. So it's now, the WEF today is, the title is Cooperation in a Fragmented World, but this is something that really brings communities together.
Absolutely, and I think your point about what is commonly called co-benefits and being really intentional on every dollar spent. What are the co-benefits? And if it's a sort of biodiversity dollar, what are the climate co-benefits? What are the livelihood co-benefits? It's a climate dollar, what are the biodiversity? What are the livelihood co-benefits? And so I think being much more intentional about that as we go forward. And are there sort of innovative approaches, any particular ones that you'd want to highlight?
So in the case of Egypt, of course, we have protected areas. We have Ras Mohammed, which was in Sharm el-Sheikh. Many of the participants at COP visited, and we have projects that have been, more mangroves in certain areas, protecting the reefs. Lots of projects that are taking place on the ground with our colleagues from international institutions, UNDP, and many others. And the good thing about the international community coming together on projects in countries is that it could be scaled. Because despite the differences in biodiversity, there are many similarities on how you push forward a project. So I think this experience sharing is very, very important, and creating platforms for that. And I'm sure that I didn't attend COP15, but I'm sure that that was also discussed, and my colleague Minister of Environment was very present there, and there's a lot of advocacy around what Egypt is doing.
Great, good. And I'd like to come back to some of those country platforms. But Andrew, to you, 2,900 days. Now, you have been one of the pioneers in this field. You wrote 30 years ago now, you led the World Bank's first World Development Report on development and the environment. You've been a core player at the Rio Earth Summit and worked in government, the World Bank, and obviously now at the Bezos Earth Fund. What's your sort of rallying call to action? Where do you see some of the greatest excitement and potential around new financing mechanisms to get us to the scale that we need to achieve for this urgent challenge?
Well, yes, Jane, you take me back. First time I met you was at the Rio Earth Summit. I was 12, and I think you were 6 at the time.
I like that.
And my goodness me, we watched, do you remember? We watched heads of state walking up, and they did it sort of one by one. They could come whenever they wanted, but at any one time, you could see 3 or 4 of them walking up and signing the Biodiversity Convention. And it was a time of amazing sort of moral commitment, actually. There was nothing sort of politically shabby about it. It was absolutely genuine. And then for the next 30 years, we didn't exactly deliver on the promise, did we? But, you know, it does look like we might have a chance now. There's no question about it. We mustn't count our chickens. But I do think over the last 3 or 4 years, and there are people in this room that deserve a lot of credit for this. And by the way, Peter Thompson is back there, the special envoy for the ocean. Christian Talecki, I mean, my goodness me. The WEF deserves a lot of credit, by the way, bringing nature up. And you've got Jim Leap here, from Stanford, and WWF, Minister, yourself, and other people in this room, real giants, actually, that have made a difference. And we now have this incredible opportunity. But obviously, a promise isn't a delivery. We now need to deliver. The good news is we have some delivery. The other person in the room that just came in, a great friend of all of us, Gustavo Manrique, who is the Minister of Environment for Ecuador. And what a fantastic story. 4 heads of state came to Glasgow, and they said, we live next door to each other. And by the way, we have a common sea heritage that is unbelievably precious. And by the way, some fish swim across the whole thing. Why don't we create the largest transnational marine protected area in the history of the world? And that was Ecuador, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama. And it was, you know what was great about it? Because what do you need in order to make this work? You need the best science, because the 30 have to be in the right place, by the way. It's no good protecting something. You've got to protect the right. You need the best science. You need real political leadership. You need a financial package. You need inclusion of people. And you need a disciplined delivery mechanism. That's what you need. And what was really fascinating about, oh, and by the way, you need a narrative that is irresistible, that includes jobs and livelihoods and a future that's hopeful. And what was great about what you did, Gustavo, is that you egged each other on. These 4 countries, these heads of state, were exchanging sort of, how did you manage to get your fishing industry on board? Because actually, if you tell a bunch of fishermen that you're going to protect the area and no fish zone, they don't intuitively think this is a brilliant idea. And what you did is you brought the best science that some of you in the room have been part of, which actually shows if you protect it right, your fish catch will go up because the fish will be able to grow up and you'll be able to, with less effort, catch more fish, earn more money. And it was so interesting, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but talking with President Lasso and yourself 2 days ago, when they announced, you know, the protected area around the Galapagos and elsewhere off the coast of Ecuador, the fishing industry was standing behind you. The actual fishermen were physically in the room. So what does that say? It says that there was a narrative that was persuasive. And that's really important that we work on that. So there's a package of things, but just a word, sort of where do we go next and what about finance? This morning we had a really interesting session on something called FLIPS. And FLIPS is forest and land use, investment, partnerships. And we had ministers from Brazil and Indonesia and Ghana and DRC. And then we had the John Kerry's, we had the German government, we had the British government, and we had then philanthropy, and we had NGOs. And here's the idea. The idea is, wouldn't it be good, rather than us all trying to be as helpful as we can? You know, at the moment, I mean, who doesn't want to help Brazil with a new government, a huge opening? Who doesn't want to help Indonesia? Who doesn't want to help the tropical Andes, the Ecuadors, the Colombias, and so on? Of course you want to help it. Who doesn't want to work in the Congo Basin? The problem is that actually it doesn't really add up. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a coherent, government-led citizen-led, indigenous people-led plan that we would bring the political and the financial power available from the outside. We would actually also think creatively about carbon markets, which we probably are going to use if they are well designed, and we might want to talk about that. Got to bring the corporate sector, who can play an important role. Wouldn't it be good if we could make the whole add up to some of the parts? So the idea of FLIPS is to do what the so-called jet Ps do, which is jet Ps are South Africa, Indonesia is keen to transition from coal to renewables. And that takes actually a lot of financial and physical engineering to do that. So the idea is, couldn't we do that also at the same time? In terms of philanthropy, I have the privilege of representing the Bezos Earth Fund. It's really encouraging to me how philanthropy is getting excited. Many of them have been excited for a long time. But last year, when 30 by 30 seemed sort of a little bit uncertain, a group of us, 10 philanthropies, got together and we put $5 billion of grant money on the table that said, look, if you are able to agree on 30 by 30, count on us. We want to be part of that. And in a way, the deal ought to be that any country that says we're in for 30 by 30 and is serious about it, we have to be there to help.
Absolutely, absolutely. And demonstrating that serious about and partly demonstrating that serious about, as you say, by having sort of country-led, country-owned, multi-stakeholder platforms which bring all those players together. And I don't know if any of you want to comment on examples of that in addition to what Andrew has shared.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Andrew was going to mention Nuevo there, but let me...
Well, I thought I'd leave it to you. That was
Okay.
the other platform, yes.
So exactly, I mean, jet Ps were explained by Andrew, and they are directed to countries that use coal, so that we help them with the transition, or the G7 helps them with the transition to renewable energy. And then countries that don't use coal, but do have adaptation plans, do have mitigation plans, do have biodiversity plans, what do they do? So in our case, and in preparation for COP, Egypt has its Climate Strategy 2050. We announced our new NDCs. And leveraging on the partnership we have with the international community, with our development partners, be it bilateral or multilateral, we put together Egypt's country platform for the nexus of water, food, and energy, NWFE, and that is pronounced in Arabic Nuwafi, and that means fulfilling pledges. So this COP was from pledges to implementation. During COP27, let me go back to the finance, because one of the key I don't want to say excuse, but one of the what is labeled as a stumbling block is that there's the money, but we don't have enough projects, or that the countries are not clear about their objectives, or the communities are not involved. So we try to create a platform where we say we own it. These projects are linked to the NDCs, so they are adding to the national goals and also to the global goals. And at the same time, and given that we are an African nation, adaptation is important. So we do have adaptation projects, and mitigation is important, and they are linked. And this comes the nexus of water, food, and energy. And we have been able to mobilize financing. And the idea is, as you mentioned, multi-stakeholders. So we have the government there. We have a grant component. We have concessional finance. These are all financing tools that are designed to bring in private investments, because very important in the climate discussion, we don't want to add more debt. Yeah. We actually want to encourage private sector, and philanthropy has a big role to play, because they can catalyze through grant components. So this is a practical example that we try to put together, and between now and next November, which is our presidency, is to show the progress on what we've done with Nuwafi as a country-led platform. The other important aspect on financing, and we've here, having debt swaps for nature, very, very important. There are carbon credits in the carbon market, but also we've been discussing, and this was one of the outcomes of work we've done in preparation for COP, also in the Sharm el-Sheikh guidebook for just financing, is resilience credits. So when we have adaptation, or if we have a biodiversity project, how can we create resilience credits to also attract participation from community or from the private sector? So it's given scope for us to think together. With EFAD, this resilience credit came up. Now we are discussing with Citibank and others, how can we actually operationalize it? So it's not just the 30-30 ambition, but it's also the ambition of using our imagination with tools to accelerate and help us fulfill the ambition itself.
Yeah, great. And I was at a very interesting meeting this morning with Bank of America as well, talking on this topic. And I think the potential to mobilize the GFANS community around this agenda even more so than
GFANS are part of the platform as well. Yeah. So in this country platform, we tried to put everyone who was saying we are not there because the countries are not ready with projects. We were able to bring them on board, and now moving forward on the implementation.
On the implementation side, yeah, and the key sort of thing of not being ready for projects are the on the ground capacity. And Peter, you mentioned the importance for technical assistance for rangers and sort of local community leaders. Can you say a bit more about what you think sort of governments, donors should be doing to build the sort of the capabilities, the capacity, the networks of those frontline intermediary leaders who are playing such a crucial role?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear it because, I mean, we are such an on-the-ground organization and, doing the work. And it's something where our single limitation to growth and scaling impact at the moment is literally only funding. So, as funding flows and as you scale, you've got to, build the capacity to do it, and that's so important. But it's something where, that kind of goes with the funding. So in terms of having projects and being ready, and again, a little bit talking on a sub-Saharan African perspective, countries are ready. Countries want it. They want to make it happen. But they are looking to the international community to be able to say, how do we do it? And they've got, like any country that commits to 30%, the opportunity cost of this land is huge. Yeah. So it's something where, setting it aside, they're willing and prepared to do it. But then actually taking on the financing burden of it. We've done some calculations where the financing burden for Africa is 65 times higher than the financing burden of the whole of Europe if you look at the protected area state relative to its GDP. Yeah. Now, for a continent that's really struggling with all kinds of issues, that's a tall order to ask. Yeah. So we're seeing at the baseline level, there's this huge demand. It's fantastic to hear about the resources and where does there's money out there to be able to go to the projects. So somehow we need to bring these two together quite quickly.
Absolutely, and I think another quote I heard this week was one of the African leaders who said, we've got oil and gas resources under the ground, we've got incredible natural resources above the ground. The international community, you don't want us to develop either of those. That doesn't sound like a just transition. So how, one has to find a way to make it both macroeconomically viable, but particularly viable for local communities and livelihoods. Great. I'm going to open up very shortly to comments from the floor or questions from the floor. But before I do that, the corporate sector, what role should business be playing? What should we be expecting, particularly from large multinational companies around the 30 by 30 ambition to make sure we get there? And Andrew, to start with you and then come to the Minister and Peter and then out to the floor.
Well, I think it's very encouraging how the corporate sector is actually taking this much more seriously. Of course, they have to start reporting on their own impact on nature the way they do on climate. And we now know how to measure greenhouse gas emissions. We're learning how to measure impact on land and water and biodiversity. That's going to be very important. I mean, the first thing must be do no harm.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of harm out there being done, obviously. And let's not forget, at the end of the day, the reason we're losing forests in Southeast Asia is two words that everyone here has used today: palm oil. So don't blame them. Let's think about the entire supply chain. And so those in the corporate sector that are part of this, whether you are a state's owner, or whether you buy from smallholders, whether you process the palm oil, whether you manufacture cosmetics, whether you sell it in stores, or whether you are a citizen like you and myself that actually needs to learn better, that whole thing needs to be taken care of. Now, in terms of actually joining in the financing plan, It's a little less intuitive in most places that the private sector can make money, if you like, out of it, but by no means is that impossible. And go to countries today, and you see they are exploring whether it's ecotourism or whether it's a sustainable trade. And if you go to a country like Gabon, many people talk about that because it's trying to do such innovative things. I mean, how interesting it is that 10 years ago, they were exporting all of their raw logs and getting less than 10 cents on the dollar. They then passed a law that said from now on, we're going to process our own logs. Do you know what happened? The international community went crazy. And they said, you can't do that. It's against the WTO rules, which it wasn't. But there were certain European countries, I won't mention their names, that behaved exceedingly badly, putting pressure on Gabon not to do it. Gabon says, we're going to do it anyway. Now they have one of the most superb, not only ply mill but furniture. They're some of the best sort of wood processing industries in the world. Still, they're having trouble getting that finished product into certain countries because of trade barriers. That's an example of where you've got to take a whole of business approach, including trade as well as investment.
Absolutely. No, that's a great example there. Minister, your thoughts in terms of the private sector?
The private sector, Andrew started with this concept of there's no metric when it comes to adaptation, nature, and so forth. The private sector always looks at CO2 emissions. This is how we are contributing to reducing it. We had a discussion here in May at the WEF. There's appetite to participate, but how can I, on my list, say I am doing climate action when I don't know exactly what you mean by adaptation? So I think the experts need to try and identify scientifically how each dollar that is put in is going to bring some sort of outcome. I think that is not been fully identified, and I think if we do a little bit of effort on that, more private sector money can flow in. The business case is another one. I used to be Minister of Tourism before international cooperation, and definitely the management of protected areas is extremely profitable. But of course, sustainability and protection has to be, so the regulation is such that you are not over, there's no over tourism, etc., etc. But there is money to be made if it is properly regulated in a certain way. The third point is everybody's talking about blended finance to attract and catalyze private sector, and that blended finance does require, again, either grants from multilateral development banks, from philanthropy. So there are models that can push that forward. We have also discussions on blue bonds, which is another tool. Green bonds have already been issued in many countries. So it's the corporates that we talk to in different places are interested, but I think there's a little bit of homework to be done on the measurement and also on, as I mentioned, using our imagination with the and practicality when it comes to innovative financing tools.
Yeah. So both, sort of respect and do no harm, and innovate and yes, create, and then be accountable. That's fantastic. Yeah. Peter, a quick comment from you, and then I'd like to sort of open up. If people can indicate if they want to make a comment, we've got some real leaders in the room here today as well. So
yeah, maybe just I think two quick observations, Jane. One is again on the ground, the funding that's coming into kind of core conservation at the moment is mostly coming from governments themselves. Mm-hmm. They contribute from bilateral, multilateral institutions, and huge role being played by philanthropy. Amazing role played by philanthropy. The role that is a little bit kind of where there's some room for upping the game is definitely the corporate sector. Second observation has been here at the World Economic Forum. Having some of the conversations around the table, the corporates are there. They're listening, they're wanting to be part of the solution, and they are looking for the how. And I think the more that we can develop the how, I think that'll enable that to play a way greater role.
So clear guidelines and accountability. Thank you. I know we have, Peter, if everyone could sort of introduce themselves, and I'll take sort of 3 comments and questions. As always, we're getting close on time. But
okay, good. I've got a question for the panel. Firstly, I want to say thank you to Jane and the panel. I think this has been the elephant in the room in Davos this year. The Global Biodiversity Framework kind of went a bit quiet after Montreal. Maybe Christmas got in the way.
Yeah.
But this is as important as the UNFCCC climate COPs, which of course get all the limelight. This is something in terms of our intergenerational justice, which is what we all care about most, is as important as climate change. One heading on the highway to hell of 3 degrees or 2.8, whatever they think it is now, yeah, that's terrible. But living in a world where when we get to 2030, we have failed to put the Global Biodiversity Framework in place is a world which is the beginning of the cascading of the loss of millions of species, you know, and ultimately, by the time of our grandchildren, our species as well. So this is just hugely important, what you and the panel are discussing here now. And I would like to say that something has to change when we come to 30 by 30. Because we failed at 10 by 20, we got to about 7.8. And coming from the South myself, I know that developing countries just cannot carry this burden under existing financial systems. You know, we cannot. We'd love to convert our whole countries into protected areas, but we can't. We've got medical bills to pay and school fees to pay and things. So, question is, and here, the first opportunity we've got to put teeth into 30 by 30 is coming up in a few weeks, Vancouver, 2nd to the 3rd to the 9th of February. I hope that many of us will be there. How are we going to fund 30 by 30? That's the question. Because with all the good work of philanthropy and private sector, and we're not going to do it that way. It's something transformational has to happen. And Andrew mentioned the development of the carbon market. And that's my question to the panel. You know, how can we move to that quickly? Because the South does have ability there.
So, carbon market and breakthrough large-scale finance. We have one here very quickly, and then we'll go down there. Oh, Minister, if I could call on the Minister. But Alex, you go first, and then the...
The
Minister first. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. No, Minister, please go. Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Andrew, for that spontaneous word. I really appreciate it and take it from a humble side, and I will share it to the President. Thank you for that again. You know, I just will add one more thing on that, is that we are the biggest fishing fleet in the Pacific East. So, and it's the first income of the country, and as Andrew said it, we did it in a consensus, in 5-month consensus. So, plus they are the 2 biggest fishing corporates are neighbors of the president. So 2 steps ahead in the morning and 1 back at night. So it took a time. So yes, Ecuador has increased. We have been 20 months in the government, and we have increased by 42% our protected areas in 1.5 years. We are not waiting for public policy. Structures follow strategy. So if the strategy is to create this and to have that north clear, then the structure comes. And that's an example that I want to share with you. We didn't know that Earth, Bezos, and Rewild, and some other corporates and multilaterals in Lisbon, they offered, and it's already signed, $150 million to protect this transborder. So we have to move on and make decisions and deliver. The President announced November 1st this, and January 14 was created. So just wanted to share that we are moving, not waiting, and we will announce something in Panama about the new marine protected area, and we have to talk about that, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Minister.
Well
and can you
done.
quickly pass the baton there, and then this gentleman here, if you just want a very quick question, because we're almost out of time.
2 quick comments and then a question. So I'm Will Marshall from Planet. We do satellites and do Earth imaging to help us to take care of the planet. And I think a couple of comments. One is that we've got these tremendous technologies to bring to bear. So business can't just help with doing nature-neutral pleasures. It can also help with tools. And I think the more it engages, but it takes a two-way street because these are new tools. They're not the governments aren't used to them, so the governments have to lean forward into it. Secondly, I just wanted to say that there are amazing capabilities coming, like measuring forest carbon accurately. If we judo move capitalism to really, I mean, Microsoft wants to offset its carbon. The indigenous people in the Amazon want to not cut down their forests. You're just going to need to connect the two, but you have to have credible carbon measurements in order to do that. And we're on the verge of doing that. And my question is just this. 30 by 30 is too far off. It's outside the term of office of most of the people that made those commitments. That is a real problem. What is the interim target? I think we need a public interim target, whether it's 25% by 25 or whatever the heck it is in between, because otherwise we'll end up in 2030 and all the ministers will go, well, I wasn't there to make that commitment, so that was somebody else's problem, and that's not going to be acceptable.
Okay, interim targets, carbon credits. So do you want to just stand up and talk very loudly?
Alex,
quickly.
from Systema Bio, we're an early case study working with smallholder farmers using carbon to help them integrate technologies. And in India, we've created a living fence around one of the largest tiger reserves. What I'm just worried about is that we create a competition between carbon markets and biodiversity. So the idea of resilience credit, just like we add gender and health credits to our carbon, thinking about how resilience, or if there's any conversation to have sort of carbon plus that's linked to biodiversity, because most of the deforestation is coming from farmers who just don't really have a lot of technology. They're using very inefficient farming practices, which is why they're gobbling up so much land. So just making sure that we don't isolate or create silos around this, because I think carbon and biodiversity are obviously clearly linked. So just any thoughts on how we bring farmers along in this journey?
Great. So over to the three panelists as we start to close up. Peter, if I can start with you, and then I'll come to the Minister.
Which one would you like me to tackle?
Whichever.
The Minister's comment.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, some of the discussions we've been having in the last couple of days have been around nature credits, biodiversity credits, carbon credits. Are they one and the same thing? Should we be bringing them together? What are the perversities of the carbon that we don't want to bring into the biodiversity? And there's lots to it, and it's complex, but it's something where the good thing is the conversations are being had, and I think the progress hopefully will be quite quick.
Great. Andrew?
Well, first, just a word to support what Will said over here. And by the way, do go to his website, Planet. It's amazing what they can look right down your chimney into your house. It's incredible from space. It is incredible. We now can see virtually every tree when it falls in the world. Honestly, every week. It is incredible. And not only that, we're now able to see, we will be able to see trees regrowing. And you're able to see land use change. But Will can do that. Land and Carbon Lab works together with them. You actually, not only will be able to see land use change, trees growing, bushes growing, you'll be able to see how much carbon is embedded in it, thanks to the wonders of artificial intelligence and a lot of drone technology and algorithms that continually update. Won't be perfect to start with, but you imagine what that will do. And this is an incredible development, because back to why did we not succeed on the Biodiversity Convention? We actually didn't know what was going on. You could wait 7 years and get the data from FAO, or by the way, they do a great job, or 4 years. I mean, and you know, those were government data they gave you. We now can look straight down and know. And when Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, the president of Indonesia, when he was president, we gave him a presentation of Global Forest Watch. He said, for the first time, I now know whether my policies in central Kalimantan are actually working. So that's really good. On carbon markets, look, you saw the thing yesterday in The Guardian, which basically said, look, there's a lot of sham stuff out there. And the reason for that is that project by project doesn't work. And we know how to make it work. You have a jurisdictional approach, and you embed the best technology in it, and there's no reason at all why you couldn't get it right. And we need to progress it was actually Peter asked about carbon markets, you asked about farmers. We need, in the next 5 years, we need to be much more rapid, but no less thorough in coming up with how you do different carbon credits, including for farmers as they seek to enrich their soil or plant bushes and trees. They should be rewarded, and it is not impossible to do that.
Great. Minister, last word to you before calling on Rico.
Will was part of that discussion that we had in May, and I think that we need to take that forward. I see Jen here in the audience. We launched the philanthropy part yesterday, and I think that the metric that could be provided, we can move that forward through this work. Resilience credits, EFAD is taking the lead with us, and it's exactly to use the projects with farmers in order to see how we can quantify. And finally, on the intermediate goals or the dates in between, I think we depend on the envoy, special envoy in Vancouver, maybe to push that forward.
Great, thank you. Rico, one of our outstanding young global leaders from Archie Reef, what would your call to action be as we start to close up here?
Thank you, thank you. I'll try to summarize the comments from the floor as well. Let's not look at the previous failing promises that we promised to make. Just look at this one in particular. 30 by 30 was first proposed in 2019, and it took us 3 years for the world to come together and said, yes, let's do it. And now we're setting a goal of 7 years ahead, 2,900 days. I wish I could have years, but we're days only. So the question is, how can we move faster? Now that the roadmap and the vision is clear, and there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the carbon market. Carbon neutrality has been pumped and it has been pushed because there's a market push behind it. I understand carbon crediting and the calculation is still not perfect and still rooms for improvement. But when it comes to nowadays, we're not only talking about carbon neutrality. We're going beyond. We want to be nature positive. And when it comes to the metrics, the technology is ready. All the science are guiding direction towards geospatial data and metagenomics, environmental DNA, all of which would allow us to streamline the assessment and the credits with a very strong scientific foundation. So I think we are at a stage that we can really accelerate. Before we actually have the formulation, I think it's about who is going to be the first buyer and who is going to be the first movers in this space. I think philanthropy, for example, is going to play a major role. And across from that, especially now that we're talking about a cross-nation, cross-countries problems, I think that is where, once we have that system ready, transparent, and tradable, that is where the international companies and private sectors can come in to break the national border to make sure that we have a global impact across around the world. So to close, I will share a few wearing the youth hat, is that I'm actually a scientist by training. And for me to jump out of the conventional academic career path is that, and jump into this ecopreneur career, which I did not expect though. I'm a first-time founder. But there is hope. And I'm seeing a greater and stronger buy-in from the private sector that we can actually accelerate the framework and the technology way faster than ever before. Right now, we're actually a 2.5 years old startup, only a team of 20 full-time. We started in Hong Kong and we are expanded to Abu Dhabi, where we are deploying meters of coral reefs in the water. What I hope to see next year when we come back here is more than that. One thing that I feel like this is my first Stafford experience, and I've been to a lot of different international conferences. One major difference that I'm seeing here is that oftentimes I walk away the meeting with a follow-up action. And I hope to come back next year to tell that we are working beyond Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi and even different marine ecosystem with different buy-ins from different sectors. So thank you.
Great. No, thank you, Rico. And thank you. And I strongly recommend check out Archie Reef. I think a few closing comments from my side. I mean, two key things. 2,900 days, Nuafi fulfilling pledges. And I think the 6 sort of key overall takeaways is that compelling, inspiring narrative, which we need to keep working on. Country ownership and political will, jurisdictional landscape approaches, which might be within a country or cross-boundary, strong and the best investment in the best science, technology, and data, the innovative financing packages, and inclusion of people and the people at the core, and then finally that individual leadership that's on all of us to move forward with. So thank you very much for the outstanding leaders both here in the room, and thank you for everyone who's joined us online. Been wonderful to be with you all. Thank you.